My name is Audrey Sinclair, and I was 32 years old when I realized the most exhausting people in your life are not always strangers. Sometimes they are the ones who think sharing your blood gives them the right to manage your time, your choices, and eventually, your peace. My older sister had known for months that I was leaving town that weekend. I had talked about the trip at family dinners, mentioned the hotel, even joked about finally taking a break without checking my work email every 10 minutes. So when she brought up babysitting at my parents' Sunday brunch, I honestly thought she was kidding. She was not. She looked right at me and said she needed me to cancel my plans and take her kids for the weekend because her sitter had fallen through. I told her no as calmly as I could. I had paid for everything in advance. I needed the break. And for once, I was not going to rearrange my life because someone else assumed I would. That was when her face changed. She slammed her hand on the table and snapped that I only ever thought about myself. The whole room went quiet. I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I just picked up my bag and walked out, because something in her voice told me this was not really about childcare anymore, and I was right. By the morning of my flight, she had already decided that if I would not make her the center of my weekend, she would make herself the center of mine. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you are listening from and what the weather is like where you are today. At the time, I kept telling myself it was not a big deal. Families help each other. That was the sentence I had repeated in my head for almost 3 years, every time my sister called at the last minute and spoke to me like my schedule was a blank space waiting for her name. It had not started that way. Before she got married and had kids, we were actually close. We used to meet for brunch, text each other stupid memes in the middle of the workday, and talk about everything from dating disasters to which stores had the best fall candles. I loved being around her, and when her daughter was born, then her son 2 years later, I truly wanted to be the kind of aunt who showed up. At first, that was all it was. Small favors, picking up one child from an after-school program when traffic got bad, sitting with them for an hour when a pediatrician appointment ran late, bringing over soup when everybody in the house caught some miserable winter bug. None of that bothered me. What bothered me was how quickly gratitude turned into expectation. Somewhere along the way, asking became telling. A quick favor became an entire Friday night. A temporary emergency became a routine no one had actually discussed with me. My sister would say things like, "You do not have kids, so it is easier for you," or "You are the flexible one," or "Come on, we are family." What she really meant was that my time counted less because I lived alone and did not have a husband or children depending on me. It did not matter that I worked long hours as a UX strategist for a healthcare tech company in Chicago. It did not matter that my weekdays were packed with meetings, deadlines, and the kind of mental exhaustion that follows you into bed. In her mind, my life was still somehow more optional than hers. I had been planning that Las Vegas trip for months because I was burned out in a way that no amount of sleep was fixing. I did not want anything wild. I wanted one beautiful hotel room, one spa appointment, one dinner where nobody asked me for anything, and 4 quiet days where my time belonged only to me. I booked everything early, paid for it all myself, and mentioned it often enough that nobody in my family could pretend they had forgotten. That was why her demand at brunch hit me the way it did. It was not just rude, it was deliberate. She knew exactly how much that trip meant to me, and she still chose to put me on the spot in front of our parents. Like if she made the scene public enough, I would cave out of embarrassment. Looking back now, that was the moment I should have understood this was going somewhere uglier than another family argument. She was not upset that I said no. She was furious that I finally meant it. I left for the airport before sunrise that Saturday, the kind of dark Chicago morning where the streets look half asleep and the city feels quieter than it ever does during the day. My suitcase was already packed by the door, my ride share was on time, and for the first time all week, I felt calm. I remember checking my phone as the car pulled onto the highway and seeing two missed calls from my sister and one text that just said, "Are you seriously doing this?" I turned my screen off and slipped the phone back into my bag. I was done explaining myself to someone who had already decided I was wrong. By the time I got to O'Hare, checked my bag, and made it through security, I could finally breathe again. What I did not know was that while I was standing in line for coffee at the airport, my sister was pulling into the parking lot outside my apartment with both kids in the back of her minivan. Later, when I watched the footage, the entire thing unfolded like a scene from a movie I never would have believed if I had not seen it with my own eyes. She parked, got out, walked up to my building entrance, and started calling me again. Then she buzzed my unit twice, even though she already knew I was supposed to be gone. When nobody answered, she stood there for a few seconds with this look on her face that I knew too well. That tight, furious expression she got whenever reality refused to bend around her. Her daughter stayed in the van. Her son was in the second row with a tablet in his lap. The engine was still running. And then my sister did something that turned an ugly family fight into something a lot darker. She reached into her purse, pulled out the old spare key I had forgotten she still had, and let herself into my apartment. She did not step inside like someone checking on the place. She moved through it like someone who felt entitled to every inch of it. She went straight to the kitchen first, then the living room, then my bedroom. She opened drawers. She pulled things off shelves. She yanked open my home office cabinet and took my work laptop. Then she took my passport from the fireproof box in my closet, which meant she had not just come in angry, she had come in thinking. She knew exactly what would hurt me the fastest if I realized it before boarding. At one point, she stopped in the middle of my living room, dropped onto my couch, and just sat there staring ahead with my laptop bag beside her, like she was deciding whether she was finished or whether she wanted to make the damage worse. Before she left, she grabbed the necklace my parents gave me when I graduated, the one piece of jewelry I never left out unless I had worn it recently. Then she walked out, locked the door behind her, and drove away, like she had every right to be there. A few minutes later, she called our parents. By the time my flight took off, she had already started telling them her version of the story. That she had shown up with the kids because she thought I would do the decent thing, that I had ignored her calls, that I had abandoned family over a vacation, and that she was the one left scrambling while I ran off to enjoy myself. What she did not know was that every second she spent inside my apartment had been captured in crystal clear video. She thought she was punishing me for choosing myself. She had no idea she had just handed me the proof that would change everything. By the time I got settled into my seat, fastened my seatbelt, and stared out the window while the plane pushed back from the gate, my phone was vibrating so much it felt like it had developed its own pulse. I already knew who it was before I even looked. My sister had called again, then my mother, then my father. Then my sister one more time, like she was determined to be the last voice in my head before takeoff. I should have ignored all of it. I know that now. But there is something about seeing your parents' names flash across your screen in the middle of family chaos that still reaches for the little part of you trained to pick up. Explain yourself, smooth things over, and make everything less uncomfortable for everyone else. So right before the flight attendants told us to switch our phones to airplane mode, I answered my mother's call. She did not say hello. She went straight into that disappointed tone mothers somehow perfect over decades, the one that makes you feel 12 years old even when you are old enough to pay your own mortgage. She said your sister is outside your apartment with the children, and she says you would not answer the door. She said the kids are confused and upset. She said this whole thing had gone too far and asked me, in a voice trembling with accusation, whether a weekend trip really mattered more to me than family. My father got on the line right after that, and was even worse because he sounded calm, which somehow made it sting more. He told me that sometimes being part of a family meant stepping up when it was inconvenient. He told me my sister was overwhelmed, that childcare falls apart sometimes, that I was making a temporary problem into a permanent fracture. And there I was, 32 years old, buckled into a plane seat I had paid for with my own money, listening to two people who should have known me better talk to me, like I was abandoning a toddler on the side of the road instead of taking a trip I had planned for months. I let them finish. I did not interrupt. I did not raise my voice. I did not mention the fact that their version of events was arriving through the one person in the family who could turn any inconvenience into a personal tragedy with herself at the center of it. I just listened until there was a pause, and then I said, very calmly, I did not leave anyone stranded. I told her no 6 days ago. I told her no again at brunch. If she chose to drive over there anyway, that was her decision, not my emergency. My mother inhaled sharply like I had slapped her. My father started to say something about compassion, but I cut in before either of them could build another speech around why my boundaries were somehow a character flaw. I told them to check their email in 5 minutes. Then I ended the call. What I sent them was not some desperate attempt to buy back their approval. That is important. I need to say that clearly because my sister later tried to twist that part too. 3 weeks before all of this, I had booked a 3-day cabin stay for my parents in Wisconsin Dells. My father had spent years talking about how he missed quiet mornings near the water, and my mother was forever saying she wanted one real spa day where nobody asked her to cook, clean, host, or do anything for anyone. I had found a resort with a lake view, a golf package for him, a massage and spa credit for her, and a small private deck where they could sit with coffee and feel like retired people were actually allowed to enjoy retirement. I had paid for it in full and planned to give it to them the following weekend as a surprise. But sitting on that plane, listening to them question my character because my sister had called first and cried loudest, I realized I was done letting other people define me before I even got a chance to speak. So I forwarded them the booking confirmation, the prepaid itinerary, the reservation details, all of it. Then I sent one short message underneath. This was supposed to be your gift for next weekend. I booked it weeks ago because I love you. I am not selfish for taking my own trip, and I am not responsible for a problem I did not create. I hope you enjoy it. Then I switched my phone off. For the next 4 hours, I had no idea what reaction was waiting for me on the ground, and honestly, that silence was the first peace I had felt in days. When I landed in Las Vegas and turned my phone back on, the flood started immediately. My mother had texted first. Her message was full of exclamation marks and heart emojis and disbelief. She said they had no idea. She said the cabin looked beautiful. She said it was incredibly generous. My father's text came right after and was much more him, just a few steady lines saying he appreciated the thought, that he had spoken too quickly earlier, and that they would call me later. Then came my sister. Her message had none of the fake heartbreak she used with our parents. It was pure acid. So this is what you do now? Buy people so you can look like the good one? I stared at that text in the middle of the airport while people rolled suitcases around me and laughed and hurried to baggage claim. And all I could think was that she really did not hear herself. In her mind, I was manipulative for giving our parents a gift I had already planned, but she was perfectly justified in weaponizing their emotions to punish me for not babysitting. I did not answer. I did not need to. For once, I had said what I needed to say, and left it there. My parents called me later that evening after I had checked into my hotel. I was standing by the window in a room that overlooked the Strip, with the city starting to glow outside as the sun went down. My mother sounded lighter than she had that morning, almost embarrassed. She thanked me again for the cabin and asked why I had not mentioned it sooner. I could have been petty. I could have told her that surprises only work when people do not assume the worst about you before hearing your side. But I was too tired to fight in circles, so I just said I wanted it to be a surprise and left it at that. My father apologized more directly, not dramatically, but enough. He said he had reacted to the version of events he heard first. He said he should have called to ask, not accuse. It was not perfect, but it mattered. For the first time that day, I felt the ground shift a little under the story my sister had tried to build. And that, more than the cabin itself, was what she could not stand. She had expected our parents to rally around her. She had expected me to spend my weekend defending myself while she played the overworked mother pushed to the edge by her selfish sister. Instead, their anger cooled, their tone softened, and the spotlight she had aimed at me started drifting back toward her choices. She could feel control slipping, and she hated it. Over the next day, that became even more obvious. My parents accepted the trip and started talking about dates, what they would pack, whether the weather up there would be warm enough for my mother to sit outside in the morning with her coffee. They sounded excited, relieved even. My mother sent me a screenshot of a pair of sandals she was thinking of bringing. My father asked whether the golf course at the resort had club rentals. It would have been sweet if there had not been that ugly truth sitting underneath it all, which was that their disappointment in me had evaporated the moment they were reminded that I was useful in a way they liked. That realization sat with me longer than I wanted it to. I loved my parents. I still do. But love does not blind you forever once you start noticing patterns. My sister wanted from me in the most aggressive way possible. My parents wanted from me in the gentler, more socially acceptable version. She demanded. They expected. She exploded. They pressured. She used guilt like a hammer. They used it like a hand on the shoulder. Different styles, same assumption. That I would be the one to bend, because bending had become my role in the family. That was part of what changed for me on that trip. And it changed before I even knew what she had done inside my apartment. The weekend was supposed to be about rest, and in some ways it was. I had one long massage that made me realize how much tension I had been carrying in my shoulders without noticing. I sat through a show that was so beautiful and strange, it pulled me entirely out of my own life for 2 straight hours. I had dinner alone at a restaurant where nobody interrupted me, nobody asked for a favor, and nobody expected me to solve their last-minute disaster before dessert. But underneath all of that, something in me had started to harden in a healthy way. Not bitterness, clarity. I was seeing the shape of things more clearly than before. My sister had not been asking for help all those years because she had nowhere else to turn. She had been asking because I was the easiest person to pressure, and when easy stopped being available, she escalated. My parents had not questioned her story at first, because on some level they were still more comfortable with me making sacrifices than with her facing consequences. The cabin resort did not fix that truth. It just interrupted the script long enough for me to breathe. And while I was breathing in dry desert air and trying, for the first time in a long time, to enjoy something without guilt, my sister was back in Illinois getting angrier by the hour. I did not know yet how far that anger had already gone. I only knew that she had lost the reaction she wanted, and with people like her, losing control is never the end of the story. It is usually the moment they decide to do something worse. The second full day in Las Vegas was the first time in months that I felt like my body had stopped bracing for impact. I woke up without an alarm, ordered coffee I did not have to share with anyone, and sat by the window in a hotel robe watching the desert light spread across the buildings. It sounds small when I say it now, almost embarrassingly simple, but peace feels dramatic when you have been living without enough of it. No one was calling my name from another room. No one was texting to ask for a favor disguised as a crisis. No one was waiting for me to say yes so they could go enjoy their own life while I put mine on hold. I had forgotten how different a day feels when it actually belongs to you. I spent that afternoon at the spa, then walked slowly through a row of shops without hurrying, without checking my phone every 5 minutes, without carrying the usual low-level guilt that had followed me for years whenever I did something that was only for me. That guilt had not appeared on its own. It had been trained into me, layer by layer, every time I was praised for being understanding, flexible, easy, reliable, the one who never made things harder. People love calling you those things when what they really mean is convenient. The strange thing was that the more distance I got from home, the easier it became to see the shape of my life clearly. My sister had spent years treating my availability like a shared family resource. My parents had spent years smoothing it over in ways that sounded kinder but led to the same result. And I had spent years cooperating because it was easier than conflict, easier than guilt, easier than becoming the selfish one in someone else's story. Somewhere between a hot stone massage and a quiet dinner alone, I understood that the trip was not selfish at all. It was overdue. That night, my mother texted me a photo of the cabin balcony in Wisconsin Dells after they had checked in. The lake behind it looked still and silver in the evening light. She wrote that it was beautiful and that my father had already claimed the chair with the best view. A few minutes later, my father sent a separate message telling me the place was perfect and that I had chosen well. Reading those texts should have felt warm and uncomplicated, but it did not. I was glad they were enjoying themselves. I was glad the tension from that awful phone call before takeoff had eased. But I could not ignore how quickly the emotional weather in my family had shifted. That morning, I had been treated like the cold, careless daughter who put a vacation ahead of blood. By evening, I was thoughtful again, generous again, worthy of affection again. Nothing about me had changed in those hours except that I had reminded them I could still make them feel good. It was an uncomfortable realization, and once it settled in, I could not shake it loose. I started thinking about all the times I had been valued most when I was useful, agreeable, and available. About how rarely anyone asked what something cost me, as long as it made life easier for them. The truth was that my sister was not the only one who had gotten used to me bending. She was just the loudest about it. Meanwhile, my sister had gone strangely quiet. After that ugly text accusing me of buying our parents, she stopped messaging altogether. At first, I thought maybe she was finally embarrassed. Maybe our parents had pushed back harder than usual. Maybe her husband had stepped in and told her she had gone too far. But silence from someone like her did not feel peaceful. It felt loaded. She was not the type to cool off and reflect. She was the type to go still when she was reworking the story in her head, trying to decide how to regain control. That uneasy feeling stayed with me through the next morning. I noticed I had 2 motion notifications from my apartment camera app buried under travel updates and promotional emails. I almost ignored them. Cameras pick up all kinds of harmless movement in apartment buildings. Light shifts, delivery drivers, maintenance checks. I told myself it was probably nothing, especially because I had not gotten an urgent call from building management, and there was no obvious reason for anything to be wrong. But every time I set my phone down, I found myself thinking about those alerts again. I did not open them. Part of me did not want to spoil the last stretch of my trip with one more family-related anxiety spiral. Part of me still believed, or maybe wanted to believe, that even my sister had limits. She could yell, guilt trip, manipulate, and recruit our parents. But surely she was not reckless enough to do anything beyond that. Surely there was still a line she would not cross. So I silenced the thought the same way I had silenced so many others in that family. I told myself not to be dramatic. I told myself I was overthinking. I told myself I would check everything when I got home. Looking back, that was the last little piece of denial I had left. The rest of the trip passed in a strange split screen. On the outside, everything looked exactly like the kind of weekend I had hoped for. I had one last dinner by myself, took my time over dessert, and even laughed with a server who asked if I was celebrating anything special. I almost said freedom. On the inside, though, something kept tugging at me. Not panic exactly, more like a pressure behind my ribs, a quiet sense that the story back home had not ended when my plane took off. My sister had lost too much too fast. She had lost the chance to force me into babysitting. She had lost the sympathy she expected from our parents. She had lost the moral high ground she liked to perform from whenever she wanted to paint herself as the burdened one and me as the selfish one. People like that do not accept humiliation gracefully. They look for somewhere to put it. By the time I checked out of the hotel and headed to the airport for my flight home, I had that familiar feeling again, the one you get right before opening an email you already know is going to change your day. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid. I had no reason yet to believe anything worse had happened, but deep down I think I already knew. My sister was not done punishing me for choosing myself. I just had no idea how expensive she had decided to make that lesson. I knew something was wrong before I even unlocked the door. It was not dramatic at first. Nothing was splintered. Nothing looked broken from the hallway. But the second I stepped inside, the air felt off, like the apartment had been handled by someone who did not belong there. One of the couch cushions was on the floor. A drawer in the entry table was half open. My bedroom door, which I always left cracked, was standing wide open. I set my suitcase down without even taking my coat off, and walked through the place with that cold, sinking feeling spreading through my chest. By the time I reached my home office, I was already shaking. My laptop was gone. Not misplaced. Gone. Then I checked the closet shelf where I kept my passport in a small fireproof box, and the box had been shoved back into place empty, like someone had wanted me to know they had been thorough. I went to my dresser next. The necklace my parents gave me when I graduated was missing too. That was the moment my brain stopped trying to explain things away. This was not random. This was personal. I grabbed my phone and opened the Nest app with hands that suddenly did not feel attached to me. The footage loaded, and there she was, my sister, clear as daylight. She stood outside my apartment door with that same angry, pinched expression I had seen at brunch, glanced at her phone, then reached into her purse and pulled out the spare key I had completely forgotten she still had. She let herself in like she belonged there. I watched her move through my apartment room by room, opening drawers, checking cabinets, rifling through papers, lifting things, putting some back, keeping others. There was nothing frantic about it. That was somehow the worst part. She was not panicking. She was not confused. She was calm, intentional, focused. She walked straight to my desk and took the laptop I used for work. Then she went into my bedroom closet, opened the fireproof box, and removed my passport. After that, she spotted the necklace on my dresser, held it up for a second, and dropped it into her tote bag like it meant nothing. At one point, she actually sat on my couch for a moment, looking around my apartment in total silence, as if she were thinking through whether she had made enough of a mess or whether she wanted to hurt me a little more. I replayed that part 3 times because my brain would not accept it the first time. She had not just lost her temper, she had made a choice. She had decided that because I would not give her my weekend, she was entitled to invade my home and take pieces of my life with her. I called the police before I could talk myself out of how bad it was. 2 officers arrived within the hour. I showed them the apartment first, then the footage. Their expressions changed almost immediately. One of them asked whether I had given my sister permission to enter while I was away. I said no. He asked whether I had asked for the key back before. I told him I had forgotten she still had it, which felt humiliating to admit. They had me make a list of everything missing and explain my relationship to the person on the video. Hearing myself say my sister over and over out loud made the whole thing feel even uglier. One of the officers said, very carefully, that this was not a misunderstanding. Between the unlawful entry, the footage, and the value of the items taken, this was serious. That word landed harder than I expected. Serious. Not family drama. Not a messy argument. Not sisters fighting. Serious. They contacted her that same evening. At first, she claimed she had only gone over to check on my apartment because she was worried about me traveling alone. Then she changed it and said she thought I would want her to grab a few things for safekeeping. Neither excuse lasted very long once they told her there was video. My laptop and passport were recovered from her house the next day. The necklace was there too, buried in the bottom drawer of her nightstand. When my parents came over and I showed them the footage myself, my mother covered her mouth and started crying the second the video showed my sister lifting that necklace off my dresser. My father did not say anything for a long time. He just stood there with his jaw tight and his eyes fixed on the screen, watching the daughter he had defended turn into someone he could no longer explain away. And for the first time since all of this started, nobody asked me to be understanding. What happened after that moved much faster than anyone in my family expected, especially my sister. People love saying the legal system takes forever, and a lot of the time it does, but clear video evidence has a way of cutting through excuses. Once the police recovered my laptop, passport, and necklace from her house, the story she had tried to build collapsed almost overnight. This was no longer a hurt mother having a breakdown or a stressed sister making a bad decision in the heat of the moment. This was unlawful entry, theft, and deliberate retaliation, all documented frame by frame. The prosecutor did not treat it like family drama, and that mattered more than anything. My sister kept trying to reshape what happened into something softer, something that sounded emotional instead of criminal. First, she said she had only gone inside because she was worried about me. Then she said she meant to teach me a lesson about responsibility. Then, when even her own lawyer could not make that sound reasonable, she tried the version that was closest to the truth. She was angry. She felt abandoned. She thought I needed to understand what real pressure looked like. What she never seemed to understand was that none of those feelings gave her permission to cross the line she crossed. In the end, she took a plea deal. She avoided jail, but not the consequences. She was sentenced to a year of supervised probation, months of home confinement, mandatory counseling, community service, and restitution tied to the damage she caused and the disruption to my work. The judge was especially cold when he pointed out that being overwhelmed as a parent did not make another person's home yours to enter, or their property yours to take. My sister stood there and cried in court. But even then, I did not hear a real apology. I heard frustration. I heard self-pity. I heard someone grieving the collapse of her own image, not the harm she had done. And the legal consequences turned out to be only the beginning. Her husband finally watched the footage all the way through after spending days trying to believe there had to be some misunderstanding. There was not. He saw her use the key, move through my apartment, take my things, and leave like she was entitled to all of it. A week later, he moved out with the kids and filed for divorce. My parents stopped defending her after that, not because they suddenly became different people, but because the evidence had taken away their favorite refuge, which was denial. My father told her she was no longer welcome in their home until she took real accountability for what she had done. My mother, who had once called me selfish for getting on that plane, returned every spare key my family had ever had to my place without me even asking. Financial help from my parents disappeared too. No more emergency bill money. No more free weekends of childcare from them. No more soft landing every time she created chaos in her own life. For the first time, she had to sit inside the mess she made without someone rushing in to cushion the consequences. That, more than the sentence, seemed to break her. Because the hardest punishment for people like my sister is not just losing money or freedom, it is losing access, losing control, losing the ability to twist the story before anyone else can tell the truth. She had spent years believing that if she pushed hard enough, guilted long enough, or cried loudly enough, the family would bend around her. This time, it did not. This time, the record was permanent. The proof was undeniable. And this time, I did not step in to make things easier for anyone. I wish I could tell you the ending was neat, that she transformed, apologized, and rebuilt everything she destroyed. That is not what happened. Some people do not learn from consequences. They just resent them. Last I heard, she still told certain relatives that I ruined her life over one mistake. But by then, I understood something I wish I had learned years earlier. People who benefit from your silence will always call you cruel when you finally tell the truth. The real ending was not her sentence or her divorce, or even the look on her face in that courtroom. The real ending was quieter than that. It was changing my locks. It was taking back my peace. It was understanding that boundaries are not betrayals, even when family treats them like one. Loving people does not mean letting them use you. Helping family does not mean surrendering your home, your time, or your dignity. And if someone punishes you for choosing yourself once, believe me, they were never asking for love. They were asking for control. That was the lesson she paid dearly to teach me, and it is the one thing she can never take back. At Revenge Argon, our team is dedicated to creating meaningful, engaging stories that entertain while also sharing valuable life lessons. These stories are entirely fictional and are made to deliver educational messages, thoughtful reflections, and positive takeaways for our viewers. The villain in this story did not just cross a line. She destroyed trust, abused family ties, and treated love like a tool for control. If you were in this situation, how would you deal with someone like her after everything she did? Would you forgive her, cut her off, or make sure she faced every consequence?